Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Anna.
We will continue with our discussions on philosophy of education in attempting to get better conceptual clarity. Today, we will be inquiring into social justice, what are the issues related to it in current schooling context, and the normative aspect of how teacher can address these issues. So, the objectives of today's lesson would be to understand schooling as a factor in perpetuating inequities, reflecting on issues related to curriculum and implementation on social justice, and appreciating the role of a teacher in addressing these social justice issues. I quote a few philosophers who worked in the area of social justice. Social justice is a philosophically contested and normative concept. This is what Goodlett has said. But then Rawls says that justice is the first virtue of social institutions. That being the case, schooling is a social institution and it has to directly address social justice issues. But despite a policy of affirmative action in our country since our independence, and constitutional provisions being there, schooling has not been able to address social justice issues as effectively as it should have. The National Curriculum Framework 2005 had come out with position papers, and quite a few of them talk about these issues. They directly address the problems that face Indian schools and also provide solutions for them. And the curriculum and the implementation that NCF 2005 suggests offers solutions in terms of better addressing the social justice issues. And I quote from the curriculum framework here: "Despite over 3 decades of commitment to equality and universalization of education, the ground realities are still grim, especially in the context of the marginalized groups and girls from rural areas." So, how does school perpetuate inequities? If we look at studies after studies that are being conducted in our country for the past 40-50 years, specifically in the area of sociology of education, we find that the learning outcomes of children from certain castes and communities are way below the national average. Similarly, for Adivasi children and children from urban deprived communities, specifically the street children, the children of migrant workers, slum and pavement dwellers. So, a lot needs to be achieved in terms of shortening the achievement gap of these children. And of course, children with disabilities. Despite India being a signatory of the Salamanca Declaration and having adopted inclusive education in our country for quite a long time, when it comes to the learning achievement, these children are getting integrated, they are being included in mainstream schooling, but in terms of learning achievement of these children, still a lot more needs to be done. Now, one of the biggest factor that acts as a barrier in schools is the negative attitudes that we carry. And it's not just the teachers, because teachers form a part of the community. These negative attitudes primarily arise from a lack of knowledge. We all share assumptions of what it means to be normal, and these ideas are not questioned or even explicitly thought about. I would like to share an example with you of engaging a group of student teachers. These student teachers were given a case study wherein a group of girls had written about what they wanted to be in 5 years' time. And lot of these girls, understandably so, because they were 19 and 20 years old, they wanted to get married and settle down. But they had also mentioned that when they work, their husband and parents-in-law must be understanding, and they must permit them to visit their parents once in a while, and in case they get delayed at work, they should give them permission. And during the discussion that followed this reading, none of the girls in the class found anything odd about the write-up. It took one boy to point it out. Why do girls need permission? He said, yes, you have to inform. There has to be mutual respect between the wife and the husband and his parents, of course. But for you to wait for permission, to seek their permission to visit your own parents, simply doesn't make sense in this day and age. It was only then that the girls started pondering about it. Till such time they didn't even think it was unnatural for them. So this was one example of a stereotype. Study findings show that some of the other assumptions include stereotypes of lack of academic ability of certain groups of children, and parents being responsible for the poor academic performance of children from the economically weaker sections. This is primarily because we willy-nilly project middle class values of raising children onto these parents as well, who live in a very, very different sort of a world. So, the other stereotypes include children with disabilities cannot cope with the regular curriculum in the mainstream classrooms, and they need special schools and they need to be segregated, or that other children may not be comfortable being with children who look and behave differently. So, there are studies that show that these stereotypes are quite deep ridden among the teachers, because a study was conducted on teachers. Definitely these perpetuate in the society also, in the communities also. Then other than these stereotypes, the other barriers include labeling of children as slow learners. School after school that we visit, teachers happily label children, these children are slow learners. Right in front of the children, they point them out. And the position paper on the problems of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe children point out that teachers place an undue obsession with language purity and correctness. So, mainstream language expects certain accents. The dialects may not be conducive to these accents and these ways of pronouncing certain words, but teachers are very insistent that the correct pronunciations be made. Of course, children need to learn the correct pronunciation, I am not denying that, but that can come at a later stage, not when they have just entered school and they are getting used to the school ethos, to the academic ethos, and beginning to learn language in a formal sense. So, at that point in time, it is far more important that children are given space to express themselves rather than correcting them constantly. And of course, the rampant use of corporal punishment despite there being a law against it. Corporal punishment also arises because of a strong held notion that learning is an unnatural process and children need strict disciplinary measures to learn. And most teachers tell me that my teachers have punished me, they have hit me, and I am what I am because of that. And they actually think they are doing good to children by using corporal punishment. Professor Krishna Kumar, who was the director of NCERT at the time National Curriculum Framework 2005 was developed, has pointed out that schooling has been a factor in perpetuating inequities and following insensitive pedagogies and ill thought out curricula. And this apart from the range of schools that exist in our country, offering a schooling experience to different strata of the society. And these range of schools have differing qualities. Now, the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act, the RTE Act 2009, is an attempt to ensure that every child in the age group of 6 to 14 years receives quality education, and the parameters of quality are clearly spelt out in the Act. The National Curriculum Framework 2005 and the related position papers that I spoke to you earlier about, they have certainly widened the discourse on curricular issues, and more importantly they stress on meaning making, and it places the onus on teachers to ensure that every child in her class is able to meaningfully experience the schooling experiences. So, the schools today have children with very diverse needs, who come from very diverse backgrounds and who need a diverse set of implementation strategies and a variety of resources to cater to their needs in order to be able to meaningfully participate in the schooling process. Education fosters development in a child, definitely, and within the school context, it is the teachers who are the key players in making learning meaningful to all the children. And the term all, as I just mentioned now, implies that no two children are similar, and obviously they have different needs and require different inputs. Therefore, teachers need to accept and respect diversity among their learners. They need to critically reflect on issues of discrimination and consciously attempt to adapt inclusive pedagogies and strive to create an inclusive learning environment. Of course, the society is extremely stratified, and as we have seen, there are deeply ridden prejudices within the society itself, but the teacher still has to soldier on. At least within her class, she has to ensure that all children's needs are met, and these kinds of discriminatory attitudes are not brought within the school premises. So, how does a teacher create an inclusive learning environment that promotes social justice in schools? If you look at the presentation, it says teachers need to conceptually understand diversity from the perspectives of pedagogical needs, physical needs, sensorial needs, intellectual needs, sociological needs, cultural needs. That is quite a lot for any teacher to address. So, that is what teacher education programs attempt to do by bringing in studies related to sociology of education, studies related to the philosophy of education, the psychology courses. All these courses are meant to equip you to address all these needs. But primarily, what every teacher has to believe is that all children can and will learn. So, this is a belief that all of us as teachers need to strongly imbue in ourselves. So, generally there is a tendency for teachers to say, I taught, I did my best, but the children didn't learn. So, we can't wash our hands off. If we taught and the children didn't learn, then it means we have not done enough and our teaching has not
reached the students.
Exactly. Additionally, teachers also have to be aware of our own beliefs and assumptions about children's socioeconomic backgrounds and their abilities. So, these are the stereotypes that we carry as part of the members of communities that we belong to. And we have to develop sensitivity to children's diverse needs, especially those from marginalized communities. So, this is where reflection helps. We saw in the previous session how it is important to be a reflective practitioner. So, these kinds of hidden assumptions within ourselves, when we share it in a larger group of diverse teachers, there is a chance that these assumptions would be addressed by someone else, because they are so deeply hidden in us, we may not be aware of them ourselves, of those biases. So, sharing and the process of engaging ourselves in dialogues with other teachers and colleagues will help bring these assumptions to the fore. And teachers alone cannot address the problems that a country faces, especially the social justice issues. Although she does play a crucial role within the classroom, the system also has to support her. The system has to ensure that the intent and purpose of policy, if you look at the policy documents, they are all for social justice. They are all for ways and means of addressing issues of social justice. But the system has to help teachers and the institutions also, be it the schools or the teacher education institutions or the higher education institutions, to implement these policies in an effective manner. And for that to happen, these policies have to be contextualized, and the contextualization can happen only when the stakeholders are involved in the process. And I spoke about this yesterday also. Teachers have to be provided with non-threatening spaces and support in multiple aspects to make education for social justice a reality. So, in a highly stratified society like ours, and it's based on vertical hierarchies, education definitely offers a glimmer of hope, and teachers do play a crucial role. But as I said earlier, she can't do it alone. The system and the larger society has to support her in this endeavor.
Hello ma'am, I'm Katyayani. Though diversity can be constructive at times, and there are other times where it can be destructive as well, and there will be situations where one party often wants to strongly oppose the views of the other party, where it can lead to adverse effects.
Okay, I think your response is coming from the political parties' debates that we see on television on almost a daily basis now. So, I am glad that at least some of you think that diversity is a strength. Going back to your question on how do we minimize difference, no two human beings are alike. So, we are different by nature. So, the question is, does schooling want to road roll these differences and make us all into people who do things alike and who behave like robots? Is that what we want our schooling to do? Or should we look at diversity itself as a strength and harness those diverse ideas and views that come across and respect each other's differences of opinions? Do you think that would be a better way of looking at diversity rather than attempting to minimize diversity? So, hopefully, when we build a culture of mutual respect, of most importantly listening to each other's views, even if those views are very different from ours. So, hopefully, the assemblies and the parliament of future will listen to better informed debates, and the television studio debates are also respectful of each other's views and actually listen to each other's opinions. So, maybe schools of today can promote that kind of healthy democratic discussion that our country did see in the early years of independence. It's only now that we've reached this stage that is worrying you primarily.
Hello ma'am, my name is Ruth. In the session you have already told that every child in the class should have meaningful experiences. Will you please elaborate which kind of meaningful experiences a child can have, ma'am?
I would again like to pose this question back to you. What do you mean by meaning? When we say we've understood the meaning of something, or when we say that this particular experience was meaningful for us, what do we mean by that?
Ma'am, what I think meaning actually means is when it is able to bring some change in our thinking or our behavior. Like if I had a opinion earlier, if that opinion is changed to a better version, then I can say that it had made some meaning to my life or to my view.
Excellent. That's one way of looking at meaning. But do we all dramatically change our view with just one experience, or if somebody tells us once to change, does that happen? No. It rarely happens, isn't it? So, changing in our behavior takes time, changing in our thinking takes even more time. So, primarily here by what I mean is that we make sense of what we see, what we do, what we hear, what we read. And again, what do we mean by making sense? It means we are able to connect it with what we already know, with our knowledge from previous experiences, with our ideas and thoughts that we have gained already. So, if we are able to make that connection with whatever we see, do, hear, read, what we learn on a daily basis. So, when we make that connection, then we can say that it makes sense to us. So, when it makes sense, we are able to make meaning out of it. Unfortunately, what is happening in schools is that what we are taught in school as part of the curriculum is so diverse from our everyday experiences. So, we just learn that for the sake of learning, if it can be called learning at all. So, it is mostly by rote. We write the exam, we forget about it pretty soon. So, that is not meaning making. Meaning making implies connections in all the experiences that we gain through the process of schooling. These connections we automatically make when we are in out of school context, even when we are playing or when we are talking to our neighbors or in our actions at home So there we are making sense of what we are doing automatically. Here, because the kind of knowledge that the school promotes is a specialized knowledge, the teacher's responsibility to ensure that those connections are made obvious for the child. The responsibility of making meaning, of course, lies with the child, but the teacher has to facilitate that process of meaning making. So that is why it's important for her to know the diverse needs of children, know the socio-cultural background of the children, so that these connections that she makes are relevant for the children to make sense of. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.